Okay, we'll go ahead and do the roll call. Nicole Bailey. Do not see her present. Andrea Chiribogaflor.
I see her.
I see her.
Andrea, can you hear us?
Okay. Oh, Marker is here. I can see her.
Yeah, she's here.
John Connolly.
Here.
Thank you. See, Leonard Dittman. He actually emailed me and said he might be a little late.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Great. Trevor Forbes.
Here.
Okay. Troy Hill.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Jim Howes. I don't see him. Nicole Lawless. I believe you are here.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Gregory Prunsky.
Hello.
Thanks. Brandon Rich.
Here.
Thank you. Jeffrey Reister. Do not see him. Nathan Riley, myself, I am present, and Joyanne Rusha. Do not see her either. Okay, that's everybody.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nate. First on the agenda is meetings or minutes from last meeting. Did everyone have a chance to look at those? And assuming so, I'd like to get a motion from someone to approve the minutes from our June meeting. Anybody want to give a motion for that? Anybody at all?
Sure, I'll give a motion.
Okay, awesome. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much. Meetings or minutes from June's meeting are approved. All right. Do we have someone else just join? I don't see.
That was me, Trevor. Just real quick, before the minutes were approved, there was a reference on the bottom of the first page of the minutes that referenced the extension of time on the deadline of the report we have to submit to the legislature, and they identified it from moving from September 1st to December 1st. I believe it's actually November 1st.
Gotcha. That's right.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it. Okay, so our primary task today, first, is to get a survey together. So we had a working group a week or two ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, in which we kind of floated ideas. And Mr. Pierce actually has some background in surveys. And so he told us, and it makes a lot of sense to me, that kind of we're breaking up the survey questions into two categories, right? One is what we call demographic data, right? And so that's trying to figure out what we want to know about the tow company who's answering the survey. And then the second is the actual information we're trying to get at. So today we'd like to basically just come up with a list of questions, both demographic and otherwise, narrow those down to something that's manageable, and then approve it, and then send it off to Nate. Believes they have some capabilities at the PUC to be able to create that survey, and then send it out to all the tow companies that they have emails for all over the state. So that should give us a wide net as far as getting anyone who's registered with the PUC permit. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have anything they want to discuss real quick before we dive into that? All right. So I'll start by just one suggestion I think everyone will agree with, is on demographic data. And Mr. Pierce, I think, is kind of keeping a list of questions as we go. Is that right, Mr. Pierce?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. The first is number of trucks. During our kind of working group, we determined that, it's rough justice, but it kind of gives you an estimate of how large the towing company is. If they have one truck, then maybe it's not really a towing company. It's just someone who needs a towing permit to do things. And so number of trucks, I would submit as a possible question for demographic data. All right. So with that, I'll just open it up. Anyone else have any? We're just going to kind of spitball here as far as questions and everything. Mr. Riley.
So if we're going to be asking for the amount of trucks that they have, do we in some way want to clarify what types of trucks we're talking about? I mean, if we're talking about just smaller hook trucks or big wreckers or something like that. I mean, again, I don't want to be overly burdensome to the people because again, we do want to incentivize them responding to this survey. But at the same time, I'm curious what everybody thinks about us basically laying it out so that they can make that distinction. So if they have 10 trucks, for example, maybe we set it up so they can select, certain types of trucks and then they can just write in numbers for each field or something like that.
Yeah, actually, I think that's right. Hey, John, would be basically the best, would the best way to do that basically be like how many heavy duty, how many medium duty, how many light duty do you have? Would that be the easiest way to do it?
I would just put it in our categories. We have 4 categories, 4 rate categories. Just ask them what trucks they have in each category. That'd make it simpler.
Yeah.
And that if it's a medium or a light medium or.
Yeah. So it's heavy, medium, light medium, and light duty. So those are the 4, John.
Yeah, and you got rotator as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll I don't know if we should differentiate rotators because frankly, there's not that many companies who even have rotators.
There's 6.
I think there's 6 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm agnostic. I mean, I'll defer to John. Like John is expert on this. I guess the question is, do we want 4? Just list the 4 categories, or do we want to effectively have 5 and say how many rotators, how many heavy duty, how many medium light, how many medium, and how many light duty? So, what are your thoughts, John? 4 or 5?
I say we do it all. I mean,
Do all? Okay.
Let's do it all so that we can get as much data as we can possibly get.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree with that.
I'd rather have more. I'd rather have more data than not enough.
Agreed.
For the education of us non-adepts, what are rotators?
Rotators are great big giant tow trucks that lift massive weight, booms spin around, kind of like similar to a crane, not quite a crane.
Yeah, they're very, very, very expensive.
Yeah, they're $1 million plus.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right.
Very
So
few of those.
amend my question recommendation to say the first question is kind of 5 categories of tow trucks, as John mentioned. Rotators, heavy duty, medium duty, light medium duty, and light duty. And maybe we can just literally list it to where we have those listed down, and then they just fill in a number in a column next to it. All right. What other demographic data do folks think would be helpful to gather as we're looking at this?
One that was mentioned as being relevant was the nature of the community in which they're located, or a portion of the state that they're located. And so, at least from the from affordable housing ways of dividing up the state, they've ranked the state as basically urban, let's see, rural and rural residential. I forget if it's rural residential, but rural vacation area where basically you have a very strong tourist economy versus rural areas where you don't have a strong tourist economy. And using those categories in part just based upon the cost of land and accordingly, I would say probably office space and things like that. So that would give us kind of a set of factors about where they're from. We wouldn't have to do something like that if we just asked for the address and then compiled, use the address, the city, closest city as something that we later categorize. So, but something like geographic location, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, I think geographic location is important. I think it'll be challenging to narrow them down to a spot because like there's tow companies who literally all of I-70 through the mountains. Like they probably go through a million zip codes, and so it's unlikely. John may have a different take, but it's unlikely that you'll be able to find a tow company that you could say like I operate in like low income urban areas. Tow companies generally are kind of all over that. John probably at any given time he's towing stuff maybe all over the state, and so I think it'd be hard to narrow it down. But their location, I think, where they're based at, they probably are going to do more work. So if you said Southwest Colorado, the Denver metro area, Fort Collins metro area, Colorado Springs, or Eastern Plains, like if you broke them up into chunks like that, I think you could do that. I bet. Anyone have any other thoughts on how we could elegantly find out geography without being like overly prescriptive?
Well, I guess, are we going to put that in the, or attempt to put it in the renewal process through the PUC to make it simple? Is that still the goal, Nate?
Sure.
I mean, we talked about it, and that's something I think that the PUC can pursue in the future. And actually, there's a lot of initiatives that are being handled at the department level that's filtering down to all the divisions, including the PUC. It sounds like that's information they want to gather and capture moving forward. It's something we haven't really traditionally captured in the past. But I think with, again, some of those department level initiatives, it's something I could see us very easily capturing in the future. And along with a new internal system that we're currently building, it may be even easier for us to use that as a layer that we can apply on top of other information to kind of, figure out what's going on in different areas. As of right now, I mean, we can always pull the information on our carriers and find out what zip codes they have applied to their operation. Now, of course, that's where they're operating. It's basically where their business address is, where their storage facility addresses are. That's information we already have and we can pull. But in regards to, I think where you're coming from, it's something I think we're already thinking about, and something I think is very likely to occur moving forward.
Yeah, I just think it would be simpler to do. I mean, you already have that information. You already have their name, where their facility is, and then you just throw in the extra questions we need answered, and they're going to be more apt to do it at the renewal process versus sending a separate questionnaire that they just blow off.
Yeah, agreed. But to meet our deadline, though, I think because they're not all going to come up for renewal in the next.
Nothing's going to meet our deadline.
Yeah. But you're saying maybe we do this now with our with this survey, but then maybe Nate and PUC can incorporate that same thing into future ones. So we have like a rolling data set, which would be nice. By we, I mean mostly the PUC, but we'd have access to it too, I would imagine. Okay.
How about in addition to well, it sounds like the data that's coming in has to do with just the business address, but not service area. And so maybe the best way of augmenting this is also by service area. And it would make it a lot easier too if they have like a pre-identified set of zones that they could just check off.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like service area is more important than like location. Because like for example, like I think our permit probably lists our headquarters office that's in the South Denver area. But like it wouldn't be true to say that like most of our service area is in Centennial, Colorado, right? Like that wouldn't be a true statement. That just happens to be where the mail comes. So yeah, I think service area is and it's kind of a self-selection on their part, them saying like, hey, my general service area is this. And then the question is like, how do we break down that service area? Do we want to do like just 4 quadrants of the state? Do we want to differentiate between like dense metro areas or what? Yep, Mr. Prunski.
With figuring out the service area and just the thought is maybe, and it's kind of an easy thing to find is using State Patrol's troop locations. That
Hmm.
might be they do it that they can easily pull up a map and say, well, I service 2B and 2D, and they can go around that way.
That's awesome. Where would one might find that map?
You can find it right on Google.
Well, that would be it'd be in your law enforcement side. I mean, that's the thing is you have your private property service area, which obviously is going to be anywhere in the state of Colorado. Your law enforcement towing would be anywhere in the state of Colorado, and your consent towing could be anywhere in the country or the world for that matter.
Yeah. Because the like law enforcement towing happens literally everywhere, right? And sometimes it's not even populated, but if you have an interstate, there's going to be a lot of issues there that require tow companies. But like, there's probably not a lot of private property towing required in Lyman, right? Because there's not a density and there's not parking problems. And so, but that being said, I don't know. I'm going to see if I can pull it up now. But if the state patrol zones sort of mirror, if it's an elegant way to kind of mirror what it is, that does apply just to law enforcement. But it might be that it could still be used. Because like, for example, if like the Denver metro area is a district, well, that works, right? Because then people can say, hey, my primary service area is the Denver metro area.
Sure.
So
And
that
patrol has that for the entire state. They have a zone for the entire state. So
yeah, I'm Googling the map right now. And that's called troop districts or
Yeah, Colorado
Yeah,
State Patrol.
if you get on our website, you'll find maps where it's divided out. It might not be as specific as you want, as the metro area is pretty much considered one large district, but there's 5 of them throughout the state.
oh yeah, I see it. Yeah, there's like 5A, 5B, 5C. This looks pretty good to me actually. I have it pulled up now. This could be very useful because there's a couple. It looks like there's one A, B, C, etc. that are kind of like really the Denver metro area is some version of one is the Denver metro area. And then down in Springs, it looks like that's kind of like 2A area. This might be the best thing to use, to be honest.
We would have to make sure and specify that it's an estimated operating area. I mean, because people are going to be acting on the borders of all of these different sections. I do worry a little bit that maybe I worry about putting any questions in there that will make the person look at any of these tow operators, look at it and be like, ugh, this is too much trouble. So I want to stay focused. I think this information is important, and I absolutely would like to gather it. I don't want to do anything that's going to potentially get tow carriers again to say this is too much trouble.
Yeah, that's it.
So-
Michael mentioned that last time too. It's just like if it's too much, people are gonna be like, I'm not doing that. Right? It's just too much effort.
Yeah, I'd love it if we could consolidate it onto a single page, and at most maybe one attachment to that page, and that's it. Like just one page, easily fillable, not too many questions, not too convoluted. Like that's what I think we should be aiming for.
What if we did this? What if we said like question 1 we just talked about. Question 2, we just simply say like, please click your primary service areas. So we kind of leave it up to them because they might operate in 2 of them. So you can say, please click your primary service areas. And we could say Denver Metro, Fort Collins Metro, Colorado Springs Metro, Western Slope, and Eastern Plains. Like that kind of tells you, are you rural in the mountains? Are you rural in the east? Or are you in one of the 3 major metro areas we have? And that might be an elegant way to do it. So that would kind of something I would propose. But I agree with Nate. Like if we want all the data in the world, but if we get too detailed, no one's going to fill out the actual form.
Right. I hesitate to just use Western Slope just because that will include Grand Junction as well as Glenwood Springs Aspen, and the two areas are radically different in terms of costs.
Yeah, what you would miss with that would be a carrier that basically is based in like Vail. Like they're going to do work all over the place, right? But their yards in Vail, and so their real estate expenses obviously will be higher in the Vail area than they would be in Glenwood Springs or something. But Yeah, I would just argue that like that's a cost of us being a little bit more broad with it, and the benefit is we get people to like fill it out maybe. But I'm okay with either one. Anyone have any strong opinions?
What about if we just asked them to, and maybe something along the lines of, what zip code is your primary operating area? Not your whole operation, but where are you operating the most? Like what zip code
Yeah.
or around what zip code? And then we could just take that zip code, plug it in, find out the general area they're operating, and just, again, I don't think it has to be too specific, at least for this.
Yeah. I think that might be easier. It's less for them to click or like deal with.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about their operating area, that would be where their storage facility is. So, I mean, really, when you ask their name, their business name, and their address, you done figured that out right there without asking the question.
Yeah. Because John, would you say, John, that like the vast majority of tow companies have one storage facility that they operate out of?
If they're doing non-consent, they have a storage facility.
Right. But they probably
least
don't
the
have
primary
like
one.
multiple that would get.
Yeah, I mean, some companies have multiples.
Yeah.
But they
some
usually have
bigger
a
companies.
primary one though.
Right.
Yeah.
You have your primary, your corporate place.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'm completely good with just saying, what zip code do you primarily operate out of? I think that's going to get us mostly there. And it's easy. So,
Or
all right,
just
so
take the information off when they put their name and address on the form.
Well, yeah, depending on how many responses we get, if we just ask for the company name and the permit number, we wouldn't even necessarily have to ask for other information. I could take that data and find out exactly who these people are and where they're operating.
actually, I guess that's a broader question. Are we going to be asking, is this going to be kind of like a blind survey? Or are we asking them to actually say what company they're from and their permit number?
I think there was some hesitation from some members to do basically an anonymous survey. I think there was some hesitation, and I know we had talked with Mr. Roberts about, can we receive this information where it is identifiable? We do know who these people are that submitted the information, but through the aggregation process, the data becomes anonymized.
Right. Oh yeah. So like basically saying, we're going to ask who they are, but we're not like, publicly disclosing that like, hey, so-and-so said they had this many trucks. Yeah, 100% agree with that. But are we planning on even at like asking at all the name of the company and their permit number? I don't have a strong opinion either way. I just wonder if it'll reduce the responses if we're asking it, but it might not either. I don't know. Anyone have any strong thoughts? Andrea.
I do think we should ask for audited financials, but I'm wondering if there's a way to if we do decide to be anonymous, redact that information. But so that's my request and addition to the survey.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, two things. One, you will get like a 0% response rate probably. Two, I think there may be zero, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I think there may be zero tow companies in America who have audited financials. So to have audited financials means a couple things. One, to get audited financials is going to cost you, I don't know, $70,000, $80,000 a year. And tow companies can't just afford that. Secondly, to pass an audit, you have to have what's called GAAP financials, which means you have to be on an accrual basis. You probably have to have staff accountants who actually work at your company. And tow companies just don't have them. I would be surprised if there's a single tow company in Colorado who has audit financials. Just small businesses just don't have those.
We do audits every year, and it's not $70,000. It's like 5 to 10.
Okay, well, the one I'm paying for is $70,000, so maybe I'm getting a bad deal. I don't have a problem with asking that. I'm just telling you, just in real life, that tow companies don't have GAAP audited financials, but we could obviously ask them to provide those if they have them. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, what legal grounds do we have asking those questions?
Is a question for Mr. Roberts.
That was a question for Mr. Roberts.
Yeah.
Could you ask that again, Mr. Connolly? I couldn't quite understand.
Yeah. What legal grounds do we have to ask that question?
Ask them to identify themselves.
No, to show us their financials.
Yeah, and
Oh.
Andrea wants us to ask them to provide their audited financials.
I'm not sure if the only basis in law for that would be somewhere in the PUC rules. And I'm not familiar with any PUC rules that would give us that authority.
Does anyone besides Andrea think we should ask for audited financials?
Well, we've asked for those before and we've got zero response. That's why I volunteered mine to the last task force privately amongst the crew to kind of give an idea, but we got no response from the industry on it. And no one's going to, because I mean, really, it's none of our business what their business model is.
Well, I think
And-
it is though, because it's easy for folks to basically say we need more money. Like all companies need more money, want more money. But if we're not actually basing it on need, because we don't have that information, I just think it's hard to argue whether or not increasing makes sense in the first place.
Well, that's why we went off of costs. I mean, costs are across the board with everybody. So figuring out costs and stuff like that is pretty simple to do. Financials, I mean, it really depends on the business model. I mean, Michael said that here a couple meetings ago. I mean, if one company could pay their manager say $85,000 a year, another company could pay their manager $35,000 a year. Someone can pay $150,000 a year. So each business is in their own different model. And the weirdest thing about towing is not a one, for me anyway. I'll speak strictly on myself. It's not a one thing makes me my money. Everything makes me money and everything loses me money. So it doesn't matter. It could be private property. I lose my ass on this month, but I could make money on it next month. Where maybe law enforcement, I made good money this month and I lost my ass next month. My goal is at the end of the year, I'm somehow, above water. I mean, so it fluctuates. There's so much loss in towing. It's hard to pinpoint that on one specific section. So when you're talking financials, and this is how I would look at it, if I was not in the midst of this, and I would say, as a tow company, you came to me and you said, I want your financials to find out, if you should be making more money or not, or if you're making too much money. I'm going to say, in what department? And you're going to say, the only way you can would be non-consent towing, because you don't regulate anything else here. PUC doesn't have any authority on anything else. So then I would have to somehow break my finances down to only my non-consent, which would be almost impossible to do because I'm not set up that way. I set up my business as a whole. My financials are based on day-to-day operations for all of it. I don't separate where non-consent is, where consent is, where law enforcement is versus PPI. That would be, honestly, that'd be a flipping nightmare trying to figure that out. So doing a financial in that scenario, I don't think would be effective anyway.
Okay, I do. I just don't understand how doing a survey is going to be helpful if we don't actually know the need, because consumer prices are going up for everyone and not just tow companies. And so I just don't really know how tow companies being like, this is how much it costs, this is how much my cost increase. Yeah, it's happening for everyone. And so I just don't know how the survey would be helpful if we don't actually have financials and know what the need is. And I would be open to, like, if companies do both consensual and non-consensual, just showing the full, financials without divvying it up into those two categories. I think it'd just be helpful to know.
Mr. Riley?
So I think Dre makes a good point on the split between the consensual and non-consensual tows. That's one of the new things we have to do through the towing bill. And so that's a big question we absolutely need to make sure, because I don't see any other way other than a survey like this, how we're going to get that information. in regards to what tow carriers are charging. I mean, we can tell what carriers are charging for non-consensual tows because pretty much every tow carrier is charging the maximums, and those are just based on PUC rules. So that we can easily tell, but we need a comparison point to meet the legislature's direction that we have to have some kind of analysis of consensual versus non-consensual rates. And I do think this survey is the only way to accomplish that. Furthermore, I don't disagree with you, Dre, on collecting financial data, but I feel like just again, to get the kind of responses I think we're going to need to make this a fruitful exercise, I think we have to, again, ask for the general information we're looking for. And then maybe we have some kind of a, like almost like a wrap up question at the very end of the survey saying, we would appreciate any financial data you could share in regards to any of the statements listed here. I don't know that we should phrase it in a way where it sounds like we're expecting them to do that, but again, giving them the option and saying this will be helpful to us. And again, even notwithstanding the survey itself and what it's going to say, I think we also have to be very careful on how this goes out and the kind of language we're using when we're asking for these responses, because that's also going to be a heavy consideration when these tow carriers open their email and see this survey. And depending on what that message says is, I think, going to go a long way in whether or not they're going to respond.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, I'm completely okay with asking for audited financials from my end because there just will be none that will be submitted. So it kind of be a moot point. Like, and maybe you're talking about reviewed financials. So there's a very significant difference, but like reviewed financials, it would be your accountant would look at them before they file your tax returns. The term audited in the accounting world, it means something very specific for a for-profit business. And you have to actually pass a GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle audit, which is a very long, expensive process. And that's what I'm saying. So it's not that, like, I'm not saying that tow companies don't have financials or they don't submit them. It's just those are cash basis financials, not accrual basis financials, which would be GAAP. And so that's why I'm saying if you use the term audited, it won't happen. They don't exist. But you could ask for reviewed financials if tow companies have them, and many will have those reviewed by a CPA. And so that data is out there somewhere. But I agree with Nate that, like, I don't know that anyone's going to submit those, but I don't have a problem with asking. We can ask, and people, it's voluntary. I mean, this is a voluntary survey, right? So,
Well, and what part of the financials, right? And what when you say financials, you want to just take the whole thing of the whole company, or do you want? I mean, you got to look at a lot of companies. A lot of companies have a body shop with secondary income, or they'll have a repair shop with secondary income. There's a lot of towing companies out there that do completely different style towing. I think the basics of what do you charge for consent towing, what do you charge for non-consent towing in each category gives us those numbers that we need on both sides of the coin. It's very simple. It's not evasive. When you start getting into financials, you scare people because they're like, well, what if they catch me doing something wrong, or what if I'm doing this, or people get scared too easy, especially when you talk about government these days.
Mr. Rich.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to echo a little bit of what Nate and John said. I mean, I think our goal is to get, as much useful information as we can to make a thoughtful decision. And, I get to the point that, like, so basically to me, that's going to be really what the costs are, of the providers, regardless of what their profit is and something. But if we set the rate too low, the consequence versus everybody right now, costs are going up on them. But if we set the rate too low, then the law enforcement, there would just be no providers and nobody towing trucks. They'll just stop doing non-consensual tows. And so it's really about looking at what the costs are and what we feel is a fair profit margin on that piece of the business. And so the costs are the costs as far as some of the heavy ones, the insurance, the trucks, the et cetera. But the simpler we make it, I think the more opportunity we have to get more data, as opposed to trying to get like all the data to make this great decision. We probably won't get any data. So we just need to figure out a kind of this happy medium of what do we actually need to make a thoughtful decision.
Actually, just want to mention something that Mr. Prunsky mentioned, and Nikki, but also can get us back on track. I want to finish up our demographic questions first, and then move on to kind of the meat of it. Mr. Prunsky made a great point. Number of employees, so that's a pretty easy thing for people to list. So then maybe we got 3 questions. We got number of trucks by type listed out, and they can free form fill that in. A zip code of your primary operations, and the number of employees. Those would be 3 good groups of demographic data. I think 3 is a good number, but can anyone think of any really good demographic data that's super important besides those 3 that we want to ask without overwhelming the survey before we move on to kind of the meat of it?
Real quickly on that last point, would it help to distinguish between I don't know how you label them, but drivers versus office staff?
But maybe even management too, like management, office staff, drivers, something like that.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think how that would. I'm trying to think how the use case for that. If someone lists they have 3 employees, they have no management. They have an owner and 2 employees, right? But if they have, 70 employees, then they probably do have a little bit of a management layer or something. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm trying to think of a use case where, like, breaking it out into management, like, why would, I guess, we care from the perspective of our kind of task?
Oh, it costs me more for a manager than it does for a driver.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It costs me
Yeah,
more for my impound personnel costs me more than my call taker in the dispatch center.
Yeah.
I mean, the dispatch center is not, being called every name in the book every minute of the day, where the impound is a little more robust,
True. How would you, John, like, just looking at your company, like, if you were to break up your employees into, like, and yourself into kind of like broad categories, what categories would you use?
It'd probably be like 7 categories. I think I have like 7 or 8. I mean, I have lot techs, I have impound, I have dispatch, I have accounting, I have safety managers, DOT safety guys, mechanics. I have department supervisors, and then I have general managers, and then of course principals.
Yeah, I think that's mostly. That's mostly what I've got as well.
That's I'll be 50 years next year on this.
Yeah. Let's actually, because we're moving through the demographic data, let's just take a quick vote on that. Do we want to ask for classes of employees? And this is not an official vote or anything. I'm just trying to figure out kind of where people are at. I guess anyone who feels strongly we should ask for classes of employees, I guess, do your little hand raise thing. Maybe we can count real quick. Okay, 1. Nate. Okay, we got 2. Although I really respect you guys, it's only 2. So I think
It doesn't matter to me. I mean, like I said, I'm willing to give financials. I can give the whole shit and works. I mean, we can do a field day here if you want. I mean,
yeah. Well,
I'm open for full cavity search.
I do agree, just as a general concept with this survey, we really should, simple is safe. Let's keep these questions as simple as possible. I think we can make some reasoned assumptions based on the data we get once we get it. But we definitely don't want to convolute it too much. So I don't disagree with that.
Okay. All right. So we got those 3 items of demographic data, and I think Michael's got those written down. And before we break, we'll obviously reread through these and vote. So I want to make sure everyone's clear. Whatever we decide, everyone's clear on what we're deciding on. So now I think let's move into kind of the meat of it. And
I had one other demographic, which would be an estimated percentage of consensual versus non-consensual.
So I think that would be like, I'm thinking that's in kind of the meat part of kind of what do you tow, how much do you charge, all that kind of stuff is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So
Because that will affect like
Oh,
how the
for
rest
sure.
of the data is analyzed. So it's
yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I mean, I think that actually that question, Michael, I think is the heart of what we're looking for, right? Is that type of stuff. So the first thing let's add on the list though, because I don't want to, Andrea, I want to make sure we circle back on this and I'll get a chance to voice our opinions on it. But Andrea's request, write this down as a possible one, is to request audited financials. So let's list that so we can come back to it later. Okay, hang on. I think someone just put a message in. The data I sent from the census is listed on place. Oh yes, Nikki, the data Nikki sent had some good data on number of employees. Okay. Hey Andrea, so you just put reviewed financials. Would you rather change yours to reviewed in the hopes that we'd get more responses? Maybe. I'll put whatever down you want. I
We
didn't
could
know if you
say
wanna
like and or
Okay.
financials.
Or maybe just ask for financials and give whatever they want. Maybe. Okay, perfect. All right. Now to the meat of it as well. And Michael, to circle back to what you just mentioned, is basically like trying to figure out what type of towing do you do. Most tow companies almost all tow companies do some mixture of the different types of towing. And so figuring out what that mix is for those companies, is that mostly what you're getting at?
Yeah. And I don't know if you want to be more fine grained about that, just because I know it's important to distinguish between the categories of light, medium, heavy.
Right.
And so that might, I don't know if that also crosses between consensual and non-consensual, like if we need like a matrix.
Yeah, it is. It's a matrix because there's like the question of type of equipment that you're using, right? Which we talked about, Mr. Conley told us about earlier. But then there's the form of towing, if you will, right? There's non-consensual, which has several categories, and there's consensual, which actually consensual has like an infinite number of categories. So that's going to be a little challenging for us. But yeah, you're right, Michael. It's kind of a matrix, effectively. So,
I would
Mr.
say
Riley.
go ahead.
Mr. Riley.
I was just going to say real quick. Yeah, I think having it set up where you basically had 3 fields with basically an empty space where they could put in a percentage of their, and again, it's going to be estimated percentages. No one's probably going to know exactly what it is, but set it up so that it's consensual towing, non-consensual towing, and law enforcement / recovery. Those seem like the 3 primary categories. And if we basically set it up through the survey for them to give us basically a write-in percentage for each category, they could put, some of these carriers will do 70% in non-consensual, and 25% in consensual, and then 5% in law enforcement recovery. So that in my opinion is probably the best way to do it, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'm just thinking on the consent side. I think because you got 3 primary areas. You got your motor clubs, you got your junk haulers, and then you got your basic repair, consent. So those are your 3 categories, and those 3 categories are your biggest fluctuations in the industry.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter whether you're taking it to a Discount Tire or the AutoNation or something like that, or a Medved. Those kind of tows are about the same. Motor clubs or low ballers, they're all pretty much the same, and junk haulers are junk haulers.
Yeah.
So those 3, that's kind of your tier in your consent world. If you try to get into all the consent areas, it'll never happen. There's too much.
Yeah, it's funny. Like non-consent's way easier because there's like defined categories to non-consent towing. Like it's very
Right.
clear on what you're doing. But consent is like, it can mean so many different things, and sometimes you impound the car and sometimes you don't, and that's dramatically different from a cost perspective. So we should, but we have to figure out some way. It's not going to be very good, but we got to figure out some way to do it, because the big purpose of the survey is for us to come up, or at least try to come up with some way to be able to compare consensual tow rates with non-consensual, even though that's really an apples and oranges comparison.
But if we broke that into say 3 categories, junk hauling, motor clubbing, or, repair, simple breakdown.
Mhm.
And you put that in the weight categories, that should be a pretty simple. That's why I thought it'd be great to have that in the renewal, because really the guy doing the renewal could punch those numbers in probably 5 minutes and it'd be a done deal.
Yeah.
And if they got in the group of that every year, so trying to get in the same concept of what do we want to get in the renewal process and kind of mirror it with our our startup here. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, I'm gonna do something. Nate, does this thing allow me to share my screen? Because this is a matrix, I'm thinking about if I can just share my screen with an Excel spreadsheet and I can fill in this, we can fill in this matrix together. So we are all on the same page of what this matrix would look like. Is that something I can do?
Yeah, you should be able to. Just in the bottom row there,
Present.
there's the little box with the arrow pointing up, says present now.
There we go. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Holy shit.
It's very small.
Oh, bummer.
If you
Sorry.
maximize the window, it might show a little better.
How's that?
You can also go to view and zoom in. Yeah, there you go.
All right, cool. Okay, so this is awkward because I can't see y'all now, but we'll make it work. All right. So non-consent, you have private property, law enforcement, and we'll leave repo out of this. I think that muddies the water a lot. Like they use tow trucks, but it's really not the same business.
And they're not regulated by
Yeah.
PUC either.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
They do their own little thing whenever they want. All right. So, John, read those consent categories out again.
Let's just go with your basic breakdown.
You said junk haulers, you said?
And then you got junk haulers, motor clubs, and then your basic breakdown. I mean, that you can kind of put most of that in those categories. They're all kind of close to the ballpark there. When you start getting into specialty things like that. Now, the only difference between those would be your weight classes. Obviously, towing a Volkswagen versus, a semi is different.
Medium B, medium light duty, heavy rotator.
And they had you just put the weight classes in there is all I would put. Just put your GVW.
Oh yeah. What are the weight classes? I don't remember.
Well,
So you got-
we'd have to come up with them because the weight classes that are referenced in
And
our rules are for
Yeah.
the weight class of the vehicle being towed, not the truck.
right. That's what I meant.
Not the
That's what I
equipment.
meant is we want the prices on what it is that we're towing in those classes. Right. So if you want to know how much they're charging to tow a vehicle from 0 to 10,000 pounds in, a junk hauler versus a motor club versus a private property, that's what I'm talking about. So you would say, what are your rates for this class in these categories?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So consent towers are generally they're not charging based on the equipment. They're charging based on the size or weight of the vehicle they're towing, which is kind of a proxy, but it's not the same thing necessarily.
Exactly. So when someone
Okay.
calls me for a tow and they say, "Hey, I have a Ford pickup towing a horse trailer with 4 horses in it," they're going to get charged more than the guy driving a Volkswagen Bug.
Got it. Okay.
Right? It's a weight class, so it's the same. That's how you're charged.
What are the weight classes you have off the top of your head?
So 0 to 10,000.
So 0 to 10,000. Okay.
10,001 to 19. And 1901 to 33. And 33 above.
Okay. I'll clean this up in a better format later, but generally that kind of works. That makes
And
sense.
that's how PUC regulates the rates as well. So if we keep it all in sync with each other, it's less confusing for everybody involved. Does that make sense?
Right, right. Yep, that makes sense. And then the idea is that they would literally like these cells, if you will, here on the survey, they would fill in percent, and their percent needs to equal 100. Now, I can tell you some of them that math's not going to work very well.
Well,
But
what you can do is actually ask for what they're charging as well in those same categories.
oh yeah, yeah. So
Right?
basically, be like one matrix they fill out is percent of your volume that you do. The next matrix is like how much you charging for those exact same situations or categories. Which obviously for these, like we know what they should be putting in there, right? Because it's regulated. But these would be the helpful ones.
See, that's the thing is that I can have my guy that renews, he can just open up the book or pull up the computer and go, this is what we're charging in these categories. Boom. And he can fill that out in 5 minutes, send it.
Yeah. And for you, John, is it do you guys actually, I mean, you're a little different because you're much larger than like the average tower, but like, do your employees actually have like, it's that simple for them? They just know, okay, this is a junk hauling. It's like 12,000 pounds. You know,
Well,
we
what
charge
we
this-
do is it's all figured in dispatch. They dispatch the driver. The driver has an account book with them, and they'll say it's it's this account and then that book has all that information in it. Or it could be someone they've never towed before, and they say, okay, there's their contact, and you're going to use this price schedule. And there's multiple price schedules, and depending on what the job is, that's the price schedule they'd use. So they'd say, you're going to use price schedule A or medium duty price schedule A, or they would say you're going to use a heavy duty price schedule J or something like that. They know exactly what to go to.
Gotcha. Okay. Good.
It looks.
All right.
I have one around here somewhere. It's like 300 pages of crap.
Yeah. But and like if you were like you as a tow company filling this out, you'd kind of take an app, like, you have different price schedules for all different types of customers, etc. But like you might just say, okay, like I'm going to take an average for this one because since you'll have to narrow it down.
Right.
Okay. Got it. All right. What do folks think about this matrix? Any
Well,
thoughts?
so for survey question, the top non-consent section, there's the question is, it doesn't need to be answered or asked just because the rates are fixed.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can just like
So
not have that.
yeah, so the only reason to fill in those would be not if we're asking for rates, but asking for cost information.
Yeah.
Which I think we should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's valuable, but if we did that, we'd want to have like two instances of this matrix, one asking for cost information, the other asking for rates. So we'd want to split that up. Let's see, the other thing I think would be super helpful on the consensual side, that would help us to analyze cost information, especially in relation if we're going to use CPI or any kind of other indexes, is to ask for historical patterns of rate increases on the consensual side. So if we can get something like 5 years worth of consensual rates, then that would tell us the extent to which carriers are finding the need to raise those rates given their cost, and what kinds of costs they've been able to bear.
Yeah.
Historically, just a snapshot is not going to give us that great of information, but historical data will.
Well, yeah. I mean, time will help us, but right now is the worst time to be doing this. I mean,
it's so chaotic.
It is. You can. Mr. Hill's on here. I know it because I do business with him. All the Chevron oil products went up 15% the 7th of July, and they're going up another 10 at the end of the month. I mean, so now my oil costs $20 a gallon, and I have to put new oil in the truck every 10,000 miles, and you put 40 trucks on the road, that's a big number.
So if we could get pre-COVID numbers, that would be really handy to have.
Yeah, when fuel wasn't $6 a gallon.
Yeah.
Fuel, we've had so many increases in 1 year that we can't even between fuel, freight, insurance, all the factors that go into our raw costs. Most of our customers that have service level stuff, they can't raise their labor rates or their freight rates fast enough to keep up with inflation. It's just impossible because it's a major exercise just to implement increases.
Mr. Riley?
Just a few things. I agree that this is the worst time for us to be meeting and going over this stuff just because of, all the inflationary concerns and miscellaneous other factors. And I've said that in multiple meetings prior to this one. In regards to Dr. Pierce's idea of getting historical data, yeah, I think I like that idea of not just seeing a snapshot of what it is right now, but again, that just goes into my previous comments on, what are these people, what's going to turn people away from responding to the survey? And I think we're asking for people for 5 years worth of data. That's the point where maybe a good handful of them are going to be like, yeah, I'm not doing this. So that's what worries me. I mean, I want this to be something that carriers are responsive to, and I think we can maneuver it in a way where people will be responsive, maybe even more so than in the past. But when we start getting into that kind of an imposition of asking for 5 years worth of data, I mean, I guess we could always ask, and they could always say no, but you know how it is when you're going through a voluntary survey. You hit that one question, and you're like, why am I even doing this? And so I don't want them to ever have to hit that point, which is why I want the questions to be very simplistic and easy. I mean, it'd be great if they could just sit down and fill this out in 5 or 10 minutes. Like that's, I think, what we should be shooting for. In regards to what Trevor just had up, that kind of outline where everything was, we can definitely incorporate something like that. I can see a way to incorporate something like that into the survey. I did wonder if we should split out law enforcement ordered / recovery tows to your basic non-consents, like your PPIs, just because they are going to be a lot different moving forward with the new tow legislation. I wasn't sure if we wanted to bundle those together. And then finally, as to the format, like I said, I don't think it would be too hard to incorporate kind of what Trevor was just showing us into this survey. But I thought probably the best way to approach it is one, to have it set up with just basic fillables, just like any form. You go to the DMV office and they give you the form and you just write in all your answers in the available fields. I'd like to set it up where we send them a copy that they can just print out, fill out by hand, scan, or take a picture of and send right back to us. But also have a second option of like a PDF fillable. I think we could do both. And so I like the idea of giving them multiple options, like what's easiest for you. Again, just trying to encourage that response.
Yeah. So you're saying that basically instead of, because I don't have it up anymore, but it was non-consent and now there's private property and law enforcement underneath it. So you're saying just like, don't call them both non-consent, because despite everywhere else in America, they're both non-consent. It may soon be that like law enforcement isn't considered non-consent. So just to like be more precise.
Well, just to compare it to what the PUC rules already reflect. And right now it's split up that way. When it comes to rates and charges, it's split up into PPIs, which is your basic non-consensual tows, and then law enforcement / recovery, which again has this different, hourly price structure. Right, and then consensual is one that we don't regulate the rates, but it is that third category that we want to make sure we're capturing, if nothing else, just because the legislature told us we had to. So that's how I would split it up.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll basically have effectively on that column, we basically have like 5 categories: 2 under non-consent, and then 3, which is law enforcement, recovery, and private property. And then under consent, we have the other 3.
And I still like the idea, again, just for simplicity's sake, to basically give them those 3 categories. Like, here's your non-consensual tows. And then in parentheses afterwards, we could say, PPIs and other examples of what non-consensual tows could be. And then law enforcement recovery. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then consensual, and then some of the examples that John gave. And then right below it, you have those three with just a little fillable where they slice in a percentage. I don't know if we wanted to dig deeper down into that. I think just, again, I'm just trying to think simplicity's sake and getting people to just easily fill this out.
I agree. Yep. Okay, I'm on board with that.
Nate, along those lines, it would
Yeah.
be nice if there was, I mean, this, from a consumer standpoint, there's a lot of education that they're not getting by, they can all view this as a public meeting, but there's a lot that they don't know just because they don't get in the weeds like a lot of the people on here. I would say that there are, and none of them are on this, but there are some tow companies that take advantage of the ignorance of the consumer sometimes. And there has been in my industry, commercial carriers that have been led to believe that it is a non-consensual tow, and then all of a sudden it turns into a consensual tow, and the bill is 6 times more.
Yeah, what Mr. Choi is describing is well, not just in Colorado, it's a real problem. Just like any industry, there's some less than reputable operators, unfortunately, sometimes, and they effectively trick, like Mr. Hill, like they would literally trick his drivers, either explicitly or implicitly, by basically if it's a non-consensual law enforcement ordered tow, the rates are regulated, right? So like that driver knows, like I'm going to pay whatever the state says the maximum is. They can't charge me any more than that. But if they get kind of tricked, if you will, which they're on the side of the road and they're not as privy to this towing stuff as their owners might be, and then all of a sudden it's actually a consensual tow, they go impound the car and then they charge literally exorbitant fees for that.
Well, it's as simple as hey, State Patrol told me you were broke down, and I'm here to get you. Well, the inference there is that it is run through whoever's running that region for State Patrol, and my drivers assume that it's legitimate. It would be really nice if there was some kind of authorization number from maybe the State Patrol that would be issuing that type of communication to a tower. And in some cases, some of these guys have authorization with the State Patrol in other parts of the state, just not on that corridor. So that's how they get away with it. But it would be nice if there was some type of purchase order or reference number where the State Patrol says, we can tell our drivers, hey, State Patrol said that you're broke down. We got to get you off the lane for safety. Here's the authorization number from the state.
Well, they have a thing called a CR80, and that is, and see, I actually fight this with law enforcement on the opposite side of what you're saying, where we show up on scene and they say, "Oh, it's a private tow. Deal with the customer." Well, that's not legit because it was generated by law enforcement. Therefore, it is generated by law enforcement. I got the call from law enforcement. It's law enforcement all the way to the end. No matter what happens, it's all the way to the end. So, and here's where the problem is. Excuse me. Is we'll get that where you get a police call. You get there, the officer says, "Hey, it's a private tow. They just want to take it to your yard." And you say, "Okay," and you take it to your yard, and they abandon it on you. And now you have this car left. Well, how do you file it with the state? So I have to do a process with the state of Colorado to get a bill of sale to just get rid of it and haul it to the crusher. Well, you can't do it as a private property impound because it wasn't private property. It was law enforcement. Well, you can't file law enforcement unless you have the CR number. So it's a catch-22 there. So anytime a tower is called by any law enforcement, and that's how their call is generated, it's a law enforcement tow, period. End of story. There's no question, and that will hold up in any court.
Yeah.
So you're saying there is a formal authorization. The CR number is a formal authorization number that it was law enforcement.
State Patrol, and if Leonard's still on here, he can attest to that State Patrol, they're supposed to give every single tower an 80 when they're called out.
Yep, that's true.
Good to know.
Cool. All right, so want to steer us back on getting the survey knocked out. Mr. Pierce.
Thanks. Just wanted to address a couple points. First, to circle back to Dre's request for financials. I think that's important enough that we do need to move forward with asking for that. But I recognize that if we're doing so in a voluntary survey, that may actually scare people off of filling out the survey. So what I would like to do is just ensure that for future years of the task force meeting and for future data collection, that's the kind of thing that actually gets into the renewal, the registration renewal questionnaire. Because I think if it's there and it can be required as part of renewal, then we're going to get the information that way. But if it's in the voluntary part, we're not going to get it. So my suggestion is that we do ask for financials, but actually in a different area.
Setting.
Yeah. The other thing, just because I think the historical data is important, is just to try and get something that's simpler, that's easier to fill out, and isn't quite so intimidating. And I was thinking asking just for 3 data points would be, or 3 benchmark dates might be a nice compromise. So identify, say, a date pre-COVID, a date mid-initial COVID economy, and something closer to present date, and maybe ask for 3 dates at which rates are entered, but over a 5 or 6 year period, so that at least the time is covered. But I think 3 dates that are kind of nicely put into specific economic times would help us sort out the cost information fairly well. So I don't know if that's still too intimidating, or if you think that's going to ward people off, Nate. But that was the idea of trying to address your point, but still get some historical data.
I think, and I don't know, it's hard for me. Like, sometimes I need to remember that I'm not a small tower, so I got to put myself in their position. Like, I think if I'm that guy or gal that's sitting there doing that towing survey, and I can just kind of think in my head, like, okay, yeah, about 20% of my tows are this. Oh, my rate's about that. Maybe they go look at 1 or 2 things that they're like currently using. I think they do that. I think if they have to stop and say, oh, 2020, what were my rates, or 2019? All right, I'm going to go dig up those records and then like add all the numbers together and average them and then come back to the survey and answer the question. I think that act of having to go do other work to answer the question is where they stop doing the survey, is kind of my like general thinking. And those average historical data sets kind of will force that. Like, even me, like, I would have to like go do some work and some math, and I might do that, but I think a lot of people won't. It is my hunch, but I could be wrong.
In a
I
towing
think-
business, no.
Yeah. If now to that point though, and this is kind of out of our hands, but let's say that some form of this survey was used by the PUC in future years, then you get a rolling answer to the question. So like, we wouldn't get all the answers right now, but over time you would build out, the PUC would have a data set that showed what people were responding to for those pricing or whatever over a period of time. So we wouldn't get it today, but maybe over time, I think.
I think any question in regards to consensual rates, again, just based on this legislative position they've put us in, where all of a sudden now we have to do this analysis of consensual versus non-consensual tows. I think maybe just, again, just something simple where they're filling out, and maybe John can help with figuring out what different things that consensual towers tow for, like what kind of charges they're usually assessed on your average consensual tow, like, the hook fee. I guess occasionally there might be storage for consensual tows, but then also give them the option for attaching a fee sheet. I would assume that a lot of tow carriers that are in the business of doing consensual tows have a fee sheet of some kind, and they update it periodically as they change their fees. So just giving them the option to attach that, and then they don't have to do anything other than just grab one from the stack and attach it to the survey, and that's it. Now the work is just done. And at least at the bare minimum, now we have their current consensual rates.
Nikki just put in a question of the last time consensual rates were increased for the categories posted before. So,
2016.
well, for consensual. So Nikki, there are no, like, consensual
No.
rates aren't regulated. And so there are no like increases because that's a free market system. Like, people just kind of pay whatever they, agreed with the customer for. So there's not like a particular increase time. And then the tow
Yeah.
companies, go ahead.
I understand that. I meant as part of the survey, rather than trying to gather the
Oh.
historical data. Can you ask the companies when they last raised their consensual tow rates?
Oh, interesting. I'll defer that to John if that's something that they would
I
know.
can guarantee you that every single tow company in the state of Colorado has raised their consent rates in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
I have twice, and I'm about to do a third time.
It's kind of constant. Actually, Nikki, to be honest with you, like,
It's
It- it
miserable
kinda-
right now.
yeah, it kind of happens. And John, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not like they're like, oh, in January we're going to raise rates. It's just kind of as time goes on and new contracts or agreements with commercial customers and stuff happen, over
It's as
time
your
they just
costs
raise
come
the
up.
rates. What's
It
that?
says the cost comes up. I mean, you look at fuel. Normally I follow fuel and I follow truck costs and my labor costs. Those are normally slow, and you can kind of go with that. But when you have everything hitting you so hard, I mean, it's just boom, boom, boom. I mean, I've gone up $30 on your basic consent breakdown on the road. Just in the hook fee alone, I've gone up $3 a mile. So I'm up at $6 a mile to tow
Yeah.
a car. It's nuts. It's just absolutely nuts. So when you start looking at my long-term customers, I'm trying not to lose them, right? So I'm trying not to raise them as much, but at some point it has to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of happens not in a discrete fashion, I guess. is what I
Right.
would say.
And normally here again, I look at it as if I can keep the lights on, I'm good. I don't need to make a lot of money. I just need to make enough money to be here next year.
Mr. Hill.
Thanks, Nate. I had a question, maybe for something that Dr. Pierce said, and then a follow-up question to Nate. Dr. Pierce, did I hear you say that submittal of financials should be a requirement of requesting for permitting or licensing? Did I hear you say that right?
Well, my thought was that certain selected portions of those could be requested for people who are registering as towers. And it addresses Dre's point that because we are regulating the rates, we really need accurate information of the real financial information versus voluntary information that we don't know how to verify that without actually going to the genuine financials.
Nate,
So
hey, is that
that was the gist of the recommendation? Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Nate, is that a part of the licensure process now, that they're required to submit financials in order to get licensure for towing?
No. The only thing that we require them to have, obviously there's requirements that kind of speak towards their financial position because they have to have insurance, which we all know is a big cost factor in any kind of a transportation business. But no, the only requirement we have for submission of financial data that I'm aware of is our CPCNs, which are required to submit annual reports. That does include financial data. I don't know if that requirement is based on a statute or not. I do know it's under our Rule 6212, but it's only relegated to common carrier CPCN authorities.
Okay. Well, for the record, I'm absolutely opposed to disclosure of financials to seek licensure if it's not already required or legislatively required. That's nobody's business but the shareholders of the business. I think the data that you're seeking can be collected without forwarding proprietary, very sensitive information. And
Okay.
unless they're a publicly traded company, I totally disagree with that.
Nate, and Mr. Roberts, do y'all, are there any other regulated entities besides maybe utility, which is a little bit different, but like, I don't know, limousine companies or any other kind of regulated business that the PUC regulates that requires financials for permitting?
Yeah, like I said, the CPCNs are the only ones I'm aware of.
What's the CPCN?
Oh, sorry. Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. It's a public utility.
Okay,
and
like-
so it's like it's what the taxi companies for the most part used to have, or at least the bigger ones. We've since moved to the LMT, the large market taxi cab service format. That does not require a CPCN because it's a pretty hard thing to obtain through the commission. Because there's basically people who are operating in the same space can file interventions against you and dispute you getting your authority, and they're very difficult to get actually. But no, that's specifically for like taxi companies, shuttle companies, sightseeing services. Those are the kind of transportation companies that the PUC regulates in the transportation industry that require that kind of an authority.
Yeah, and I would just, and I'm not an economist, but I'll pretend to be for a second. Like a public utility like Xcel Energy, for example, disclosing financials, it's fundamentally different because they are granted a monopoly by the government in some cases, right? And so that monopolistic aspect is why you need them to actually submit financials. Whereas like a towing company, we're regulated, but there's no monopoly at all. We actually, the opposite, we have no pricing power because it's set by the state. So I think that's probably why there's a difference between a regulated utility and a regulated carrier, I suspect. Okay, to move back on the survey. So it looks like our approach, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, for the revenue portion of it is this matrix that breaks down the percent of their tows that they do in those categories of the 2 types of non-consensual and the 3 types of consensual versus the size of the car that's being towed. And then the average rates that they're charging for those tows, understanding that the non-consensual all should be the same because they're regulated. So that kind of gives us the top line. And I'm mostly good with that. Are we okay with moving on to kind of talking about questions about costs? Like what questions do we want to ask about costs and what are tow companies even able to answer? Understanding that we can't ask them everything. Like we can't be like, list all your costs. That would be like too broad. But does anyone have any general thoughts on how we should approach that aspect?
I'm wondering if that's where we want to incorporate the cost model that's already been created.
Yeah.
So let me pull one of
pull it
those up real quick, and I'll tell you some of the fields that.
Yeah, let's not recreate the wheel. Let's plagiarize if we can.
Yeah, right. Frequently, if possible. Okay, so some of the stuff they have here, kind of how they have it broken out. Hold on. Let me pull it up for one of these. So they have it broken out, or at least the old one, they have it. Well, here, let me just share my screen and you all can look at it. One second.
Yep, that's it. I remember it now.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
Nate's Excel is black. He's fancy. Look at that.
All right, let me just readjust this so it's a little easier to read. That's still too big. Sorry. Okay. So this is how they have. So this is just for one of the types. We have different tabs for light duty, medium heavy, and rotator. But for medium, for example, so we have management costs, administrative costs, licensing costs, employee costs. There's a profit margin factored in there, taxes, losses, advertising, signs, insurance. That's a big one. So these are the kind of things that.
You know, it's really cool. Not to interrupt, but fuel has surpassed insurance.
Has it really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't checked mine, but it might. It's a sad.
So and then you have things like vehicle expenses, storage expenses, employee expenses, background checks, that kind of thing.
Oh, that Nate, that brings up something good to mention. Is I think we need to specifically state when we do the survey that we're talking about the towing aspect of it. I think if you add the storage part, it'll get very confusing to towers. So like some of them, when they respond to their rates, some of them will include the total rate, including storage and impounding, and some of them won't. And so you'll get like a lot of noise in your data. So I wonder if we need to like very specifically say we are talking about your towing operations at the moment and not your storage stuff.
Why don't we just ask for their storage rate for the day?
Oh, for not for like consensual, for example.
For if they do any storage for consensual, yeah, why not?
Yeah, like I don't think it happened. I mean, does that happen much?
I
think
don't
it does
have,
some. Yeah.
I don't have any, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's like like when you hear, well, everybody charges the max. That's not true. I don't charge the max.
Yeah.
Never have.
So I'm looking at these costs and just thinking business licenses. Because I think in the interest of keeping the survey small, we want to ask for like the big costs and ask for what are they doing? Like, are those costs? I think this was to Nikki's point a week or two or last meeting or something, but are those costs increasing at a rate that is at or below or above like the greater CPI? Because I don't think we'll be able to on the survey at like put all their costs into basically a big column and like reverse engineer their profit margin. That'll just be too long, and no one will agree on even what goes in the right category based on how their chart of accounts are set up. So I might suggest, but that we think through like what are the 4 or 5 biggest costs. Ask towers what % of your revenue is that cost on average, and how much has it gone up in the past 3 years or something along those lines. But it's less detailed, obviously, but it maybe give us a directional idea of like where the big cost drivers are going. Because like I see on this like advertising, like that's just not like maybe some tow companies, but most tow companies, that's not a super material cost. It's going to make or break the business. And so I don't think it's super informative for us. But like insurance, labor, rent, like those things are really big ones. What do you think, John? Because you have a different perspective than me, like on how much detail we should ask on the costs.
I don't know. I would say that the most expensive at the top. So we'd say I would go employees, number 1 cost, fuel, number 2 cost, insurance, your property, and maintenance. Those are your 5 top dogs right off the bat.
Yeah.
Could you say those again?
I would say your employees would be your number 1 expense. Your fuel used to be below insurance, but yeah, fuel is above insurance now. Then you have your insurance, and then you would have your property, and then your truck maintenance.
Yeah.
Those are your top 5 expenses.
Yeah. And then the other thing, which as a technical matter is not an expense, it's CapEx, but I think we should put truck purchases in there because it actually doesn't hit the income statement, but I can assure you that is a very real cost.
I put that in maintenance. I kind of
maintenance.
figured that in maintenance.
Yeah. Made me put it like maintenance or maybe just vehicle expenses in general.
Because it doesn't really matter if you have a brand new truck or an old used truck. The brand new truck, you got the payment of the new truck, and the old truck, you got the payment of upkeeping it. So it pretty much washes itself.
Yeah.
About just vehicle capital and maintenance?
Yeah, that's a good one because it'll differ like vehicle capital maintenance or vehicles and maintenance. Okay. Does anyone have any, in the interest of time, we only have about 30 minutes left. Does anyone have any issues with us like taking the approach of saying like, let's ask for the biggest expenses as a % of revenue and those growth rates as opposed to a more detailed asking of smaller expenses? Does anyone have any significant gripes about that?
So are we going to ask for just a percentage? Because I feel like we should really be asking for real costs.
Well, the thing is we wouldn't be able to do that. Like, I guess it would, I don't know that it would be meaningful unless we were asking for revenue also. You know what I mean? And in this case, we're asking for the percent of tows that get made up and the rates that they're charging on those for each tower, but that doesn't tell you like how much volume they're doing necessarily, right? And so without the numerator being an actual number, then the actual cost, it would be meaningless as opposed to giving a percent. Now we could ask them for their actual revenue, but I think that goes back to a lot of towers aren't gonna want to answer that. But in order to have the real costs, we would have to have the real revenue to compare that to, which we can do. Just yeah.
I suspect that you're going to get pretty close to the same answer of anybody that pays attention to their P&Os. Those top 5 costs, regardless of the dollar amount, are going to be pretty proportionate on the percentage basis of their total G&A costs.
Yeah, they're gonna know what those things are as a percent, not the small ones. Like if you ask me, like, what are your like advertising costs as a percent of your revenue? I'm like, I don't really know. I have to go do some work. But I can tell you, like, you know, generally speaking, or in about 5 minutes, what my percent of costs are of those very large categories, because those are the ones we're constantly watching.
You're going to know your top 5.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Those are the ones that put you out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your revenue number is immaterial. It's still the percentage of your G&A expense.
Yeah. So my recommendation would be to ask them as a percent, because otherwise you have to ask them for their actual revenue. And I could be wrong, but my hunch is that a lot of towers would be like, I'm not sending my revenue out there. And just to be transparent, like people watch the news and there's a new tower, usually me, but there's a new tower being bashed on the news like every night. And towers are like, I'm not sending my revenue in there. So that way it gets to Denver 9 News and it's published out there at 7 p.m. tonight. They're just not going to do that in the current environment.
Because a lot of the people in the world aren't conscious to how, you know, the general consumer doesn't look at a P&L every day. I would hazard to guess half the general consumers don't even know what their personal budgets are. So the numbers would be meaningless to them. It would just look like an inordinately large number that they have no clue what's in it. And any expenses aren't taken out of it, so it doesn't get chopped, and taxes aren't taken out of it. So I think a percentage is more than adequate.
Yeah, I'll be transparent to everyone. I'm not sending my revenue in. If I were to send my revenue in on this survey, I'm mostly sure it's going to end up on the news. And so I'm not going to do it. If I'm not going to do it, I suspect that other towers are not going to be apt to send their revenue in on the survey.
For what it's worth, for those of us on the consumer side, that are having to pay these rates, we're basically loading the deck in favor of raising the rates to what from the consumers looking at are astronomical, and I'm not hearing any kinds of counter forces in this. So I'm starting now to see a survey that's largely gathering data that supports cost increases versus keeping them in check. And so I'm getting concerned about where the nature of these questions are going.
Yeah. I'll just be honest with you, Michael. I'm not advocating any cost increases. Like I'm not, and I don't think John right now is advocating any either. What we're advocating is that I don't want my financials to be on the news, and that's where I fear they will end up based on my experience over the last few months. And so
but it makes all the difference in the world if you're making if you're coming home with hundreds of thousands of dollars of profits. And that's at the expense of mostly low-income people who are having to pay the rates. Well, if there's no data that's available that determines what the profits look like, that serve as accountability for rates that are being put into the PUC rates, then and so I think our survey really needs to gather that kind of information. I don't know how we can get it, but I recognize that listing profits are revenues are going to be a turnoff for many of the survey respondents. Recognize Troy's point that it feels like an imposition on private information, proprietary information. But then on the accountability side, I'm not seeing how we get real accountability here, because it feels like the data that we're asking for is largely going to be stacked in favor of rates that could very well be ones that can go down.
Well, let me ask something here then, because this goes into a two-sided meatloaf. Am I only allowed to profit what you think I should profit? And then look at the profit margin in free market. Is it okay to say that I made $100,000 profit last year? Or is that, no, I'm not allowed to make $100,000 profit last year? Now let's flip that coin over and say there's two of me, identical, twin brothers. And I made $100,000 in profit, but my twin brother made $10,000 in profit. And you go, wow, they did exactly the same, used the exact same trucks, the exact same everything. Why did one make $90,000 more profit than the other? Well, there's so many variables there. Maybe one guy bought Snap-on tools instead of Craftsman. Maybe one guy bought premium fuel instead of regular fuel. There's so many different costs there of why one business can succeed and the other one can't in the same pond. Does that make sense? And then, and who are you to say which one can make a profit or which one can't? Now let's throw in something even more drastic. And I have this, and I get this from my employees. So I'm going to throw this out from John as personal. Well, you have that nice new truck, and well, your house is nice. Okay. I've sacrificed every single day of my life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, been married to the same woman for 32 years and have never taken her on a vacation. I've sacrificed every one of my child's birthdays, Christmases, etc. for my work. I work in the most dangerous job in America where one tower is killed every 6 days. Killed every 6 days. I have had my employees killed. I've buried my drivers. I have had drivers that have been maimed beyond recognition, guys who will never walk again. And you're going to tell me that I'm not allowed to have some kind of reward for that sacrifice? Now, when you got to look at that from a different aspect. We sacrifice a lot of stuff. We have a lot of costs, but it's very hard to go to someone like that and say, you're only allowed to make X amount of profit. Look at what you're doing off the backbone of those poor people, right? It creates a huge problem, a huge tug of war. And there's a lot of the 9 News and the Channel 7 News gives you Trevor, okay? How bad he is and how much money he makes, okay? But what about the 99% of the industry that goes through what I just said? What about them, right? And when you start getting into that and you start hitting those buttons, trust me, I know this industry. I have its heartbeat with me. You start poking that, that's not going to be good. If you look at this last House bill that went through, I've been in business 49 years. I have 362 private property accounts. You know what I did to them? I let them all go. As of August 1, my company will not do any private property towing because I cannot afford to do the work and actually be able to make enough money to accomplish the job. So the law did great. You know what it did? It eliminated 360 some people from having a tow truck. Now they got to go find somebody else because people don't understand the industry. The industry is very volatile. There's a lot of different ins and outs. And so you got to be careful when you start asking about financials and things like that. It's going to be, like I said, I am willing for this board, if you want to come to my facility, we'll do a field day. I'll sit every one of you down. I will give you a copy of my personal financials, my P&L, and show you how a tow company works, a legitimate tow company works, day in, day out, what the costs are, et cetera, et cetera. But that's information I can't just generalize to the world. But to help this board get a grasp of it and not have this hidden agenda of these mean, terrible towers that are just screwing people to death. You're talking about a half a dozen companies out of 700.
So yeah, and I'll just say for everybody, we're a very diverse group on this board, which is really good. But we probably have lots of ideological differences on lots of things, politics, and should businesses make profit or should they not, and all those kind of things. If it's okay, I'd like to recenter us on the task at hand. And the legislator asked us to basically do a study and comment on consensual versus non-consensual tow rates. And so I think we should get back on that. I mean, we can keep going down this path of that, but we won't have an answer to the survey questions on this meeting, and it'll push over to next meeting. So just, I'm not saying anyone can stop saying anything. I'm just trying, I would suggest we get back on that path of doing that and kind of stay away from kind of ideological stuff and political stuff.
Sorry.
Oh, no,
Didn't
no,
go
it's completely,
Yeah.
yeah. We all have different opinions, and that's okay.
Well,
and so-
so if I may, my comment was actually oriented towards the specifics of asking for the top 5 cost drivers. And where I was hoping to take that was that that's very good information, that's valuable information. But I think in order for the survey not to be biased towards this particular information, we really need to have some other information that is on the other side. And at least when we come up with rates, maybe it's not the right kind of information to get from a survey or this context, but I do think we need to look at costs that the consumer is bearing as well, so that we're not simply addressing one of the two parties' needs in this context.
Okay.
So hoping that we have some counter pressure of data that's at the very least
Yeah.
looking at the other side's cost burdens that they're facing as well.
Is there
Yeah,
any
just
way
a,
Is
yeah,
there any
I
way
think-
we can correlate those top 5 costs to the inflation rates of those specific categories from a generalization standpoint? For instance, to support what you just said, Dr. Pierce. So on the equipment and maintenance cost, in the last 2.5 years, and I'm not in the towing industry, but specialized trucks and putting a body kit on them is no different. You just have to buy the power unit and put your body cost on it. Your body cost is what it is. Costs have gone up from the last refined fuels bobtail I bought was about $240,000. I have 2 of them coming in, and both of them are $450,000. So from a correlation standpoint, I think it might be handy and might supply some of the data you're looking for without being too intrusive onto proprietary information, to maybe publish what the actual inflation rates are of the 5 categories we mentioned that are probably going to be the top 5 for everyone. Maybe look at the inflation rates in the last 3, 4, 5 years, the window you're talking about, of those specific categories. And that might tell you the story that you're trying to hear without us being too intrusive enough to where nobody will answer the survey. That's all I got.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Hill. And just to remind everyone that our primary mission on the survey is to answer the question that the law says we need to try to answer. And that's the comparison of consensual and non-consensual tow rates. And so the cost stuff and everything is actually in some ways a secondary thing. Just kind of reorient everyone on our mission. Mr. Rich, I saw your hand up and that went away. I don't know if you still had something.
I think I'm good.
Okay. I mean, I guess a broader question for everyone. Do we want to, on this survey, go go through the process of trying to figure out tow companies' profit margins via the survey, or do we not? I guess that's the broader question. I mean, we can talk about how to do that. I would submit that that's probably a futile exercise, and you're not going to get good information, and people aren't going to tell you. So
No one's going to tell that. No one's going to tell that. They're not.
I think what tow companies will do is tell you their big 5 costs or 6 costs or whatever we decide. What are those as a percent amount of revenue, and what is my estimate of what they have been doing over the past few years as far as increases? Because they'll just know that information off the top of their head, and it's not going to feel as intrusive to them. And that's my hunch, but
Yeah, I'm still in favor of that. I just feel like this whole exercise is futile if we're just asking people why we should increase rents, or like, obviously that's the argument that's going to be made. And if we can't see the need and actual cost, then I just don't know why this whole survey would be useful. I run a $1.8 million nonprofit. We get audited every year. You can look up my salary. You can look up our financials very easily. I just don't understand why. I mean, I just think this is like, if we're actually making decisions around whether or not to increase the prices and rates, we would have to know that. So, and I'm sure most of you are against that, and that's fine. I just want folks to know.
Yeah. And frankly, Andrea, like, the survey of comparing consensual and non-consensual tow rates, I think, is apples and oranges. I think it's silly too. So we're on the same page. I don't think we're going to draw any real good conclusions from this, but the fact is, this is what we were told to do, is to see if we can get information on those 2 rates. So I think we agree on that. Mr. Rich.
Yeah. So I just go back to your point. I think that we need to try to stay on track and just focus on the stuff that we can get and make the best decision and kind of give what we use to do that. I do think that we can probably extrapolate based on, what's being charged versus what the cost is to the need. But the other piece, again, going back to, on the profits, if revenues, if you're not breaking out what a tower is making on non-consensual versus consensual, the same as what happened on dropping the private property, you'll just continue to have people dropping the non-consensual part, and we won't have towers left. So this isn't a perfect exercise, and I'm not a tower, and so I'm not trying to protect the tower's profit, but we do have a critical need of making sure we have non-consensual towers. And so we just have to do the best we can with the information that we get, and we just got to move it forward, or we're not going to be able to present anything in November.
Yeah. So I'll just propose this, because we got not very many minutes left, and maybe we'll go over a little bit if that's okay with everyone. But I just really want to get a survey knocked out. We don't have a lot of time here. I would propose that we after we ask those revenue and not revenue questions, but the breakdown and the average rate costs, that the next question is to basically list out those 5 costs, and us understanding you're just taking me and John's word for it, but that's kind of what we got at the moment, that those are the 5 costs that are most important. And we asked towers to say, what % of your revenue does this cost make up? And what % of your revenue did it make up like 3 years ago, or something along those lines? And that's kind of the survey, right? It's pretty simple. You can fit it on 1 page. Some towers may still not answer it, but I think a lot will. And it won't be perfect. It's not going to tell us exactly how much profit each individual person in the towing industry is making, but it'll give us an idea of where those things are moving. I don't think we're in any danger of tow rates going up anytime soon, even if we did the math and realized that they needed to double. That ain't happening. Just it's not going to. But that'd be my proposal for the survey, is we do that stuff, those 5 costs, and we at least have something to work with.
I think that also helps us with that. We don't know how many towers do law enforcement towing, how many towers do private property towing. We don't have those numbers. There's no data there. So that's some data that's simple. Do you do, list, whether it could be a checkbox, list the type of towing you do, and you can just put PPI, law enforcement, consent. They check the box, then you know that they do it. At least that would give you a number of how many You know, people ask me the question all the time, how many PPI towers are there in the state? I don't know. Nate, can you answer that question? No.
Yeah, so it's not perfect. But my pitch to you guys is it ain't perfect, I understand, but we can fit it on one page, and I think it'll give us some useful data. So I'd propose that we do that. I guess, Mr. Pierce, I'll come to you in a minute. Actually, I'll go ahead to you right now. Mr. Pierce, what do you got?
Okay, so so I'd like to agree with what you're proposing, but with the small addition to circle back to my historical data recommendation earlier. The way I'm hearing this is it's also historical. We're asking for information about the major cost drivers, and my sense is that when my initial proposal of getting historical data on rates, on tow rates, consensual tow rates, was going to be a turnoff. It seems to me that leading with this cost driver question, and then following it with a rate question, where we're asking for both cost increases over the last 2 or 3 time points, and asking right after for what were your rates then, would incentivize people to provide the rates, because I'm thinking presumably they'll have just looked for the relevant data, and are very close to uncovering it, because the cost rate, asking for cost rates are going to tell them, I mean, they're going to say, yeah, my costs are going up. I want that to be reflected. But then, because we're looking at similar records, I'm hoping, then it would be useful to ask for what their rates were historically. So
That's fair. Yeah. So you're
so
saying
that, that provides some sense of the revenue stream that I think is going to be useful for us analyzing consensual versus non-consensual tows. And
I think that's fair, because what we could do is, so basically you're saying if we're asking them to kind of guess, because people are going to kind of come up with an estimate, right? Of like, oh, my rent, maybe they know, but maintenance and stuff, to go look at some records and come up with an educated guess on how those have increased over the last 3 years. Well, then, like, why not we ask that on the consensual rates as well? Because they ostensibly could come up with an estimate of that as well, of how much they've increased those rates. So I think that's a fair thing to say, is that right after we ask about percent of tows and what your rates are, just a simple question that says, on average, how much higher are your non-consensual rates now than they were 3 years ago? And I'm just coming up with 3 because the last 2 years are just freaking chaos, and it's going to be like meaningless. So comparing it to 3 years ago, I think is better. I think we could do that. I think that would be some useful information as well. And they can choose, if they don't know, they can choose not to fill it out. So I'm good with that. So does anyone have, adding what Michael just added, does anyone raise your hand if you want to vote against us going forward with our survey in the manner I just described? And please let me know if you'd like me to describe it in more detail. Okay, we sure? I don't want to make sure. Okay, good. Okay, so Michael, do you want me to recap real quick what I think we're looking at for the survey, and then folks can jump in if maybe I'm misinterpreting it?
Sure, that would be good. I'm going to have to walk through this recording just to get accurate notes anyway.
Okay,
so
perfect.
But please, yeah.
Okay, so first 3 questions are demographic data. The first question is, let's go with what zip code do you primarily operate out of? All right, I should say, what zip code do you primarily operate in? And they can just fill in a zip code. Second question would be, how many full-time equivalent employees do you have? So how many FTEs do you have? The third question is, please list the number of trucks you have in the following categories. And that would be rotator, heavy duty, medium light duty, medium duty, and light duty. And they would free-form list a number in those categories. So those three things would give her demographic data.
Is that the actual order? Just because it sounds like
Yeah.
medium light is above medium.
Yeah, that is the order. Like a medium light is bigger than a light duty.
Right. I'm
They're
just
smaller than medium duty is what he's saying.
Yeah.
heavy, medium light, and light.
Yes, sir. Correct. And then rotator at the top.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And then next we move into questions regarding the meat of it, their rates and makeup. And Michael, I will send to you and everyone else this little rubric that we made. But effectively on the horizontal axis, we're listing the size of the vehicle that's being towed, and it's 0 to 10K. You don't have to memorize this. I'll send it to you. 10,000 pounds to 19,000 pounds, 19,000 to 33,000, then 33,000 and above. Then on the vertical axis, you have the two non-consent categories, which are private property and law enforcement. And then you have the three consent categories of junk haulers, motor club, and basic breakdowns. And then in that rubric, they're going to fill out percents of, I do 20% private property, 10% junk hauler, and X% motor club, broken down by rate. And when I send this spreadsheet to you, I'll put just examples of how someone might fill that out. So that tells us the percent of their tows that they do in those different categories. Then we move in, and then the next question, a follow-on question right after that is, since, I guess how do I describe this? By what percent have you raised consent rates relative to 3 years ago?
Can we ask for going back to Nate's suggestion, actual cost, actual charges
For
versus percent increase?
Well, because there's all those different categories. So remember, there's for consent, for example, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 times 3. There's 12 different categories of consent rates when you break it down in that matrix, and so they'd have to provide that by category. And I think that might be a little bit too labor intensive. And I suspect, in general, their consent rates have all across the board increased by probably a similar percentage. So there's probably not a meaningful change in that.
Well, I think we should still ask the number and then see if there's a percentage, I guess.
Like the number is in, well, but they'd have to get a number for each one.
Right. You have to put the number of each one, right?
Yeah.
Because that would then give us that numbers to make the law happy.
Yeah, they'd have to. Yeah, because they'd have to give a percent increase over the last 3 years of those 12 different categories of consent towing. And that might be they'd be less likely to give you good information then, just because they have to go do so much work. But a tower might be able to say, yeah, my consent rates, they're mostly 30% higher than they were 3 years ago, or 35% or whatever. It'd be in the ballpark anyway. And then moving into costs, we're going to basically say, please describe the percent of your revenue each one of the following costs makes up, and how much those costs have increased as of relative to 3 years ago. And so they'll basically have, with each one of those costs, they'll have two little freeform boxes. One says, this is 32% of my revenue, or call it labor. And since as relative to 3 years ago, it is 30% higher. Right? Those would be kind of the two numbers. And then those costs are labor. I call it labor and benefits, so they understand that it's like also 401ks and health insurance and all that kind of stuff. Fuel, insurance, rent, and then vehicles and maintenance.
I think the instead of rent, I think that was property. The way John had put it, Because I'm assuming that I mean, I think we can assume that some operators will own on the land. on
Yes.
which they're
Some,
renting.
yeah.
Yeah, I own my land. Well, me and the bank.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or, well, what they'll do though, Michael, generally speaking, and this is not towing companies, this is all businesses everywhere. They will own their real estate in a separate entity and they will pay rent to themselves. And so they'll kind of pay rent, sort of, right? There's tax reasons why you have to do it that way. And so we can put property or rent. I wonder if for the majority of
Mortgage,
towers,
rent.
yeah, that's a good point. Mortgage or rent. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Hang on. I got a comment from, just 1 second. Andrea. Yes, Andrea. I am aware of the Denver Post article. I and our company have never been approached or contacted or told anything by anybody that there's any kind of investigation or interest in us or the towing industry in general from the Attorney General's office. So effectively, I don't know anything about it. So I don't have any comment on that. But if you'd like to take a vote to kick me off the task force, then we can certainly have one of those.
I vote. Get your ass out of here.
Andrea, would you like to put forth a motion to vote me off? Okay.
I second that.
All right. So Michael, if you would, kind of, when you get some time, come up with a general framework on wet word or whatever, what that would look like, and then send it out to everyone. And then hopefully next meeting, we can quickly kind of approve that and then turn it over to PUC to create a survey. Mr. Riley.
Just to maximize our time, if everybody's open to it, I'd like to have another work group between now and our next meeting, because I do think there's going to be some additional sussing out we're going to have to do with this, just to get it in the kind of format and the look that we want, and which we could then, so basically kind of what we did, between our last meeting and this meeting, where we just had a group of a subset of us or whoever wanted to show up. And, we mostly just discussed ideas at that meeting, but in this meeting, we would actually be putting this survey together, like putting it into a document and organizing it the way we want, and, making sure that the questions read the way we want them to, and it just has that overall look we're looking for, which we could then, once we're finished with that in that work group setting, we could then circulate it to the entire group. And then by this time next month, when we're doing our next meeting, we're ready to have last minute discussions about what it says, and then we're ready to send it out. That would be my suggestion.
So I'm all, and actually just real quick, we'll have a public comment period just real quick. I don't know if anyone has any, but first I'm all for that. I'll participate. Let's see. I like sticking with the Wednesdays from 2 to 4 would, I guess, what is this? August 3rd from 2 to 4 work for folks? It's basically halfway in between our two meetings.
If we stay on the same schedule, our next official meeting would be on the 10th.
Oh, wow. It would.
We've been doing it on the second Wednesday of the month.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So maybe the 27th of July that day.
Listen, what about next Wednesday, the 20th?
That's going to be too soon for me.
Yeah, I have a conflict then too.
How's tomorrow sound?
Yeah. 27th is ideal for me.
Yeah, I'm wide open on the 27th.
Yeah, I can't make the 27th, but I trust you guys.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's do the 27th from 2 to 4 p.m.
Okay,
let's do that.
And then I'll send out an invite for that to everybody, whoever wants to attend. Mr. Roberts, I'll send you an invite as well. Speaking of work groups, this is for Mr. Roberts, just real quick. Our very nice volunteer who's been putting our minutes together, Miss Lawless, she actually did put like just a very, short clip snippet, almost like a minute from our work group, which was a couple Wednesdays ago. I didn't know if that's something we needed, because we don't like do an official roll call or anything like that. We didn't do the minutes for
Yeah,
that
no.
Q&A session we had back in March. So I wanted to check with you though, because if we want to put one together and post it, we'll do that. But I wanted to check. I wouldn't even know how we'd approve that because not everybody was there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Yep.
Okay. I don't think we have Mr. Porras is listening in, but I don't know that he has any comments, but so I don't
He
think we
raised
have-
his hand at one point.
Yeah. Mr. Porras, was that an accident? I guess it was an accident. I think he's good. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, there weren't any signups
yeah.
for this meeting.
I'm shocked that we are not super popular with the general public. But alas, they have the opportunity, and that's what matters. Okay, everybody, thank you. Appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you all at the working group and the meeting in August.
Yeah, extra thanks to you, Mr. Pierce, for keeping tabs on what we were talking about today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for sure. Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Okay.
All right, bye, everybody.
Thank you all.